Show me later. Because I don't remember. It's like, did you turn volume on yet?
Yeah. I can hear that.
Hello, arty peoples, and welcome to another episode of Jerry's Live. My name is Emmy Klein, and I am your host this evening. Today I have a fun show planned where we're going to kind of progress our art skills a little bit further within painting. Now, I am using Tuscan Pine oil paints today, but the way that I'm going to be teaching this class, this is applicable to any medium really, especially when it comes to just kind of trying to further your painting skills. Within that realm, you do have to understand like watercolor still has to work dark to light. Oils and acrylics are a little bit different, so like keep those in mind. But in general, what I'm talking about today can be any media really, even pastels. So today I'm actually going to be painting, or well, I sort of already did paint this lovely image, and my amazing moderators Amanda and Michaelia are able to pop that in the chats for you guys to check out there. And if you want to work on the same image, you can, just to do this practice, but this applies to any imagery that you're going to work with. So that is what we're doing today. Now, before I officially fully jump into the whole class, I want to make sure that you guys remember that if you are interested in anything that I'm using today, make sure you go to the website JerrysArtarama.com and type in today's class code, which is JL384. So if you type that in the search bar at the top of the website, our teacher's cart will come up and everything that I'm using today will be right there for you to check out. So, painting any imagery, really. So when it comes to painting something like this, I'm trying to mentally go back when I was just beginning as an artist and kind of how I would approach this. And that's what this painting is that's right here on my table. So if we actually can go to that overhead, I will be able to show you a little bit more. There we go. So this is very typical of how I used to paint when I first started. So it was a blue sky. So I grabbed blue paint and I mixed it with a little bit of white because, you know, this is clearly too dark of a blue. And I mixed it with a little bit of white and I got a bright blue sky. My clouds were clouds. So they were white and black, which makes a gray. And then, you know, I had variations where like, you know, it got a little darker in spots and then lighter in some areas. And then that was my clouds. And then grass is green. So I grabbed green. Now, what I'm using today, I tried to grab typical colors that you're going to find in beginner sets as well. So I have a titanium white. I have a yellow citron, which is usually like a pretty standard like lemony yellow. I grabbed the permanent red light, which is like an orangey red. This is an ultramarine blue, which is a blue that kind of leans almost a little bit more purpley than some of the others. And then a sap green, which is a really bright kind of yellowy green. And then I have a couple other colors down here at the bottom, which is yellow ochre, which is technically a yellow that kind of leans a little brown. A burnt sienna, which is a reddish brown. And then ivory black, which is a pretty standard black paint. So this is how I would always paint. I, you know, pick the object color and paint it that color. It is what it is, right? It makes sense, right? But how do we get further than that? How do we take our skill sets from here and change it to where we can get some more painterly variations and more interest visually and make it look more like a painting rather than something that kind of feels almost a little flat. So one thing I do see a lot of my beginner students do is for each little chunk of whatever they're painting, they mix a big blob of color on their palette and that's what they pull from. So it's the same color blue everywhere. That is not what happens in real life. In real life, when you are looking at any kind of a landscape specifically, your horizon, where the sky meets the ground, always gets lighter. Now, sometimes it can change colors, especially with like sunsets and things, and it gets really interesting and kind of fun, but it will always be lighter. And then as you get further up, it gets darker. And the way that you can actually really, really see that is if I put my image right next to my painting, because this is all the same color blue. You see how it's a lot lighter down here and it almost matches the same value. And then as it goes up, it gets darker and you see that difference there. That is something that is very typical to most skies. It's always going to get lighter as you get towards that ground and darker as you get higher up. Now, also, if you do have any questions while we go throughout this process, make sure you pop them in the chats because Amanda and Michaela can also ask me while we're live. So if you guys do have any questions that pop in, just let me know. So I'm going to actually take this painting, which is honestly touch dry. It's not thoroughly dry because I did this a couple weeks ago, but it is touch dry, so everything is not going to come off on my hand. And I'm going to get it kind of towards this realm so you can see that variation. Now, let's grab a couple of paintbrushes here. So instead of reaching for a really big brush, I might reach for something a little bit smaller. I'm definitely not going to go massive. I know this is a large area. I might use something that is a little bit larger if I want to blend some things. But the one thing I do really love is not blending at all. Then the other thing that I also do is I start messing with my colors. So this right here, that ultramarine blue, when you mix it with a titanium white, you get a really, really pretty blue. That is a wonderful sky blue. Now when it comes to sky blue, there are a lot of different types of blues though, because you know the world has variations. So what I will do is I will pop in a different kind of blue on my palette. This is a phthalo blue. So if I actually take my tubes right here and put them next to each other, yes, they are both blue. Let me actually get them a little closer. But these are hand-painted swatches, by the way, so you can actually see the color that's in the tube. This one leans more purple, and this one has almost like a green kind of tinge to it. Now, they're both blue. Now, you're only going to see that if they're right next to each other. So everything's going to be relative. So when it comes to whether or not you use a phthalo blue or a Prussian blue, there's a lot of different varieties of blues out there. There's also an Indian throne blue, which leans a little bit more like the ultramarine kind of purpley. There's so many different variations out there, and I really highly suggest you guys go play with your art supplies and see what they can do. And if you have the ability to see hand-painted swatches or go onto any kind of a website and see the actual paint coming out of the tube and seeing those variations, that's a really big thing for you to really start going, maybe I want a blue that's kind of a little different, right? So let me actually take that, and I'm going to put that in between the two blues here. So I kind of try and keep it almost in like a rainbow order where it goes from my lightest down to my darkest, but I start with white and I go through my yellows, reds, blues, then down to my greens and neutrals, right? So that's my ultramarine blue. You can get some variety where it gets a little bit darker, where you don't mix it in with as much white, but then it can also get a little bit lighter as you pull that value up with some more white added to it. Now let me clean off my brush because I wanted to show you the phthalo blue without getting any contamination here with white as well, so you can really see that difference. So phthalo blue is also a very strong blue. Keep that in mind. It's one of those colors. So you can immediately see the difference here. So while they're both blue, this is an easy way to start adding visual interest to your paintings without really changing the big kind of information. The sky is blue. That makes sense, unless it's sunset, you know? So when it comes to representing a blue sky, there are so many variations that you can start playing with. Now, the other thing that is really fun to start playing with is color temperature. So because this leans a little bit more green, as I get down here towards my horizon, something that I really love to do is add like the titanium white with a little touch of yellow. I know if I start mixing that into the blues, it's going to go green, right? So if I already have a blue that leans a little green, the transition between those can make more sense, right? So let me clean this off. And this is, again, one of those things where it's always easy to play with and do your testing and see kind of what works for you, because there's no wrong answer when it comes to using colors when it is being represented in a painting. This is how you see the world, which is kind of really, really cool, which also kind of makes it a little difficult because you're like, well, the sky is blue, right? So I'm adding yellow to the sky. What? But if you understand the general concept of what you're trying to go for, it makes it a little less confusing. So I'm making a really soft, creamy yellow. Now, when I say yellow, that's what I mean. This is a white that is tinted with a tiny amount of yellow. So I'm going to add that to my horizon, right? Now, I'm going to also just paint over what I have going on right now, just because I'm not trying to carve around each and every little blade of grass. My goodness, I don't have the patience for that. That's okay, though, because we're going to be essentially repainting this whole thing, right? I'm not doing a very thick layer. That is just paint straight out of the tube. Now I'm going to start incorporating a little bit of that phthalo blue. It doesn't look green. It looks like a light blue, right? Because I didn't have a ton of yellow in there. And also that phthalo is incredibly strong. Trying to like tone that down. Okay, so this is another way that I start doing my kind of color harmonies, where I have a little tiny amount of color mixed. I don't mix a big blob of color, even when it comes to acrylics, because I know what I made, right? I used white and I used yellow to mix that little creamy yellow kind of thing. So I can go back and I can remake it. If it has a slight variation to what I've already put down there, that's okay. It gives it visual interest. Your eyeball will connect those two, and you don't have to make it the perfect kind of color and have it be that perfect transition. The best thing when it comes to trying to further your painting skills is try not to blend as much as possible too. That's really helpful. All right, so I am going to carve around this cloud because I don't want to really go straight into that, but I am going to try and put sort of a line of this lighter blue down, because I do need that transition from the like creamy yellow up to the rest of my sky. And what's funny is that this is going to look vastly different from the other painting that I already have going on. Now, I might start getting a little bit darker in my mixes, so I'm going to start adding a little bit more blue, right? So I'm going to start having that transition from maybe the lighter blue to a little bit darker, because remember, as your sky's going up, we're going to get darker. And I'm going to kind of work almost in bands as I go up. Now, that is only so that it can be pretty consistent, but the thing that you do need to know, especially with landscapes, is that if you have a sun that's coming up over the horizon right here, your band is now going to go in almost like a radius around that. So just kind of keep in mind that information. So the best thing I can always suggest is to just look. If it looks like it's going in a circle, follow that radius outward. If it looks like it's going in almost like a linear line, where it's just straight across, go with that. Every situation, especially with landscapes, it's going to be slightly different, because you are dealing with, you know, whatever it is that's directly in front of you. Now, again, I'm just kind of carving around that cloud. I'm not being too mindful of my edges, because I'm going to paint that cloud on top of what I'm doing here. So if I hadn't had that underpainting, the original painting down, I would have just done this, either left most of that just blank canvas, or I would have done the whole thing and then painted the cloud on top. But again, if you're doing that, because I'm working in oils, I have to be kind of on the thinner side. If you're working in acrylics, you can just paint on top of it, and that's no big deal. So again, I'm trying to just give myself some variation. Now you see that I'm working in almost like crisscross scribbly strokes where my brush is going all over the place. That's giving me that variation and that kind of visual interest that I'm looking for. Now, if I realize that that dark blue has come down a little too far, I'll add a little bit more white and I'll pull that back up. And I might adjust that later on. That's also okay. But there we go. I have that beginning of that going down to a lighter horizon. Now, if I decide that I don't like the horizon being that light, I can also just touch my brush and kind of soften that yellow just a little bit more and kind of get it to look a little bit more of a lighter blue. That is entirely personal preference on whether or not you like that. Now, the further I go, I could just get darker with my phthalo. That could work. But I have a fun ultramarine blue. So as I go up, I'm going to also go from that green blue up to that purpley blue. Now I know I have that up there. It'll mix in fine, don't worry. But that is a really fun way of playing with your color temperature, is having that balance of warm to cool. Now I know it's all relative because blue is a cool color. What blue is warm? It's in how you view it, really. I know that can be very confusing because you could say that the one that leans more purple is warmer because it leans more towards red. But you can also say that that blue that leans more towards green is also warmer because it leans more towards yellow. This is where it gets a little confusing. The way that I like to think about it is that I'm going to call the one that leans more yellow my warmer blue, especially when it comes to landscapes, because sunlight tends to be pretty yellow. As sunlight hits objects, it makes it feel a little bit more yellow, a little bit warmer that way. So in this context, that works for me. So any shadows are going to be the opposite side. They're going to go the cooler route. So if this is warm, that's my cool. So I will just consistently keep that in mind when I'm painting this. And do we have any questions as I'm going through this? Also trying to remember which puddle of paint is which. I have definitely put phthalo into the top of my sky and been like, dang it. It's happened so many times. Because like you have two puddles of blue going on here. Sometimes you don't remember. But this is also why I go from white to my yellows. And you'll see I'll add more color here. But because this blue leans more towards reds, I have it closer to my red, keeping that in my head. So it's, if I set my palette up like this every time, I usually know where I'm reaching because it's just the same thing that I reach for every time. Now, I am also, just to let you guys know what I'm doing, I'm just trying to darken that top part of my panel here because I'm trying to give myself a goal of where I'm landing. I know where I'm at here and I know where I want to be here. I want to have something in between and give me the idea of where I'm going. What's my end goal here? So if that's my end goal and that's my beginning, I have to find somewhere in between that makes it work, right? So now I'm going to start mixing the two blues together and getting a totally different blue. Third blue. I know, crazy. All right, now I'm just scrubbing it on, not being precious. Even if I have that underpainting also shining through a little bit, oh, that got really light. I'm also okay with that because it's blue. Everything's blue. This is also why it's really fun to tone your canvas with color. So if you tone it with a bright pink, maybe you'll have a little pink sparkling through. That's just playing and having fun. That's really the biggest thing with this, is just to play and have fun. We are just squishing paint onto canvas. This is not super serious. Don't stress out about it. It's just fun. This is just practice, right? Add a little bit more of that phthalo, get a little bit warmer, because as I go down, I need it to be warmer. And that's why I said, keep it in mind. This is my cool, that's my warm. Do you have a question?
More of a request.
Yeah.
While you're painting, someone was excited that you were using Tuscan Pine, and they're just curious if you could talk about like how it feels going down or any fun facts.
Yes. Absolutely. Tuscan Pine is, I'm obsessed. It is one of those paints that we have a whole show on, and I do highly recommend you guys go check it out later after we finish the show. But Tuscan Pine is an oil paint that is almost like a deep love project that we have going on here. We've worked on it for so long because we wanted this specific oil paint. We formulated it to be this because we wanted this. This is an oil paint that as you squeeze it out of the tube, it's nice and creamy, but it is so packed with pigment. So it's got that nice creamy kind of very workable feel to it straight out of the tube, but it's really pigmented. So like a little goes a long way. And if I were to start mixing it with oils to forget, glazes, and then if I mix it with some solvent and kind of breaking it down, you can get a punchy color with very minimal effort and very minimal supplies, which is definitely fun. There's a lot of really fun colors in the line as well. So I highly recommend you go check that out. And also, if you go to our website and check out all of the colors that are there, you'll see it in the grid kind of system where you have like multiple different squares and there's a mass tone, a glaze, a tint tone, and shade. I hand painted all of those. So that is exactly what you're getting. We made sure that all of those are perfectly represented because we really wanted those to be available for you guys to check out those colors. But check out the show that we had on them. We've had a couple now, but those are amazing paints, and I do highly recommend. So, okay, so now it makes sense, right? We get in that transition. Now, if I were a beginner student, this is where I might take a big brush and start blending the whole thing. You don't really have to do that. That is, you're taking your hand out of the painting. You're making it nice and smooth and soft, and that's not wrong. You can do that if you really wanted to blend out your colors like that. I just find that it just starts to feel a little bit more flat. I like to see, and I got a little brush bristle there, sorry. I like to see my hand, like this is a painting. It's not a picture that I printed off from my printer. I want it to look like a painting. So why would I take the paintbrush strokes out of there? It's not a print. So I like to keep my crazy zigzaggy brush strokes everywhere because if you look at that, that's a lot of crazy little colors everywhere, and it's all, none of it's nice and flat and soft and perfectly gradiated, but your eyeball can tell you that's a sky, right? You don't look at that and go, what's wrong with that sky? Like your eye just goes, that's sky, easy. So your brain will fill in that information and give you the ability to kind of have that happen. All right, now I'm going to rinse off my brush really, really well because we're going to start working on this cloud, which can be really complicated and confusing because white is not white. Clouds are not gray and white, for the love of everything. I used to paint my clouds exclusively in white and gray. And boy, am I glad I don't do that anymore because they're colorful. They really are. I know I'm looking at a picture here. And actually, let me move this off for just a second. When it comes to looking at clouds, and especially like when you're working on a picture, I have a blob of paint on my knuckle. I must have, oh, that's the ivory black. I dipped my finger in that. Whoops. That's why we wear aprons too. So when it comes to looking at clouds, there are a lot of different types of clouds, I know. And there's a lot of different variations, especially when the sun's hitting them and there's sunrise or sunset and like you get some weird colors happening. That's usually when the colors are punchier, but this is like a midday, right? There's not crazy sunset pinks and oranges happening, but there is still a lot of color within your cloud. Because if I were to look at this, next to that, that is just white and the ivory black making the gray, and that just looks a lot flatter than that. And the reason why is because when it comes to clouds, it definitely has that form, but there's a lot of visual interest. So remember how I said sunshine tends to be pretty yellow? I say tends to be because, again, with sunrise and sunset, it messes with all the different colors. So the areas of the cloud where the light is hitting it, I never consider that pure white. I might add pure white at the very end just to punch up my values. But I always consider that. That's like creamy kind of yellow that I made before. And if I have that in my horizon line, it's now color harmony, so it makes sense. So I actually have most of my white I kind of took for that, but I'm going to put a little extra blob here. All right, so I'm going to take, this is where I'm also going to start messing with more colors. So I have my yellow citron. Sometimes they call it lemon yellow. You know, it can be permanent yellow light. It can have a variation. Sorry, I was using a lot of this paint earlier. So this is the permanent yellow deep. So now I have, this is yellow, mind you. This is a permanent yellow deep. So if I hold that up, actually, you can see a lot of the mass tone is pretty dark, almost orangey yellow. But when you start breaking it down, it goes like a lighter yellow. So now I have a yellow that leans more towards green and a yellow that leans more towards red. Now the reason why I start having this is what's called a split primary palette. And I'm going to also put in my other red because I have a red that leans more towards orange and a red that leans more towards purple. So this is why I have it in kind of almost like a rainbow order. So I can keep my brain organized. So this yellow leans more towards my green. This one leans more towards my red. That's why it's closer to my reds. Same thing here. This one's more purpley, so it leans more towards my blues because when you mix red and blue, you make a purple. But the reason why I have this happen, and the reason why I love this palette, and I'm not including any of these colors down here. The greens and all of this down below, I don't usually include that in here. This is just a split primary between these 6 colors. The reason why, if I'm just trying to get a very basic color set, these are the colors I will go for, because with this yellow, I can make 2 oranges. With this yellow, I can make 2 very different oranges. So now I have 4 oranges to choose from. With this red, I can, oranges, but I can also make 2 different purples. And then this one makes 2 very different purples. So you can get those variations with just your secondary colors and mixing one and the other. And then, I always, again, swatch your colors, see what they do before you even get to painting. But this is a great way of having a lot of color variety without having to have a ton of color that you have to buy and have, just sitting in your studio somewhere. But I will say there are some colors that it's really hard to not have. like I was recently in Lake Tahoe and I grabbed the phthalo turquoise and cobalt Caribbean. That's because the color of that water is crazy teal. So I didn't want to have to sit there and try and mix all my colors. I just wanted to grab and go. So those colors aren't wrong and you can use them in relationship with these 2, but this is a good way of practicing your color theory and your color mixes. And when you understand how this works, you can use that application towards any color whatsoever. Now, let me make sure that this is nice and clean here before I move on to the rest of my cloud. I'm actually just going to pop that over here. I'm going to actually use a little bit of a smaller brush. So clouds are really fun, but so this area I'm going to consider like a really, really light yellow. So if I'm using white mixed in with every other color, I'm going to get really bright colors, which squish that over a little bit. Now you can see it. This is a light creamy yellow, but in relationship to all my other colors, that's going to appear white because compared to that blue, that is white because your eye goes, that's a way lighter, that's your white. But when it comes to, the cloud, trying to see color, and this is something that is not just for clouds, not for the sky, not for the grass, this is for everything you ever paint. Trying to train your eye to see color is so hard. And it's not something that just comes overnight. This is something that you have to work at over and over and over again. And it takes practice and it takes time and it takes effort of you just looking at things. And it is really bizarre how hard it is to just see color in the world. There's even people out there that have, color blindness, and I don't know how you function. My hat's off to you. But that's the cool thing about art, is that the way I see color is going to be different than how you see color and how somebody else sees color. So when we take that information and represent it in a painting, it becomes unique to us and how we've seen the world, which is why I love art in general. But that's why your painting might not look like mine. You might see something that I don't see, and that's okay. But this is how we start pushing, instead of just going, it's a white cloud with darker areas, which is gray, we start trying to find those colors. Now, because I have wet blue paint down here, and I'm painting with this creamy yellow, every time I paint on top of that wet blue paint, I'm getting a blue transfer onto my brush. Now, if you're working in acrylics or watercolors, that's not going to be that much of an issue. I just have to be aware of it because I'm working in oils. So I'm going to constantly be either removing that or having little areas where I blend it in, which is totally fine. But I definitely want to have some areas of the cloud where, it kind of feathers off, because clouds are not hard edges. They have some hard edges, they have some soft edges, they have some which is just really bizarre, like in, like I said, I was in Lake Tahoe, where the air rushes up the mountains. It forces the clouds up, and then they get really weird looking. I have so many pictures of just clouds from when I was over there, which was so crazy because I've never been in that area. So it was just really weird what the clouds were doing. So, it's really cool how clouds will do all sorts of weird things. That's, again, why we always need to just look. Don't think about, I'm painting a cloud, so just adding in those, little kid clouds where everything's a hard, bubbly edge. You have to really look. So, this gets really fluffy, and this is more of a hard edge. That's what I'm talking about. So, when it comes to this area, you could say this is a dark blue. You could also say it almost leans a little purple, but it's really desaturated, right? So we're going to desaturate our colors. Now I'm going to make a purple. I'm just a little bit of that. This is the quinacridone red deep. So that's my red that leans a little bit more purple. You can also use an alizarin crimson. Those are really great. And the reason why I like using that to mix my purples is because you get a really clean purpley mixture because it already leans more towards purple. So if you mix that with your ultramarine blue, you get a really, really beautiful clean purple. So when I say clean, I mean it's that quintessential, when you think of purple, it's purple. That's what I mean when I say that's a clean mixture, right? So this being desaturated might not be the best choice, right? So what if I take that orangey red and mix it in to, I still have that other purple on my brush still. That's okay. If I take that orangey red and mix it into that blue, I get a little bit more of a desaturated purple, which actually there's a bit of a glare on my palette here. So hopefully, I'm just going to take my palette knife and shove it under the corner just to try and get that glare off. There you go. You can see the differences between that, right? So that's a really pretty purple, and that's a more muddy purple, because that orange kind of tinge that has that, it's in that red, starts fighting the blue because we are now on opposite sides of the color wheel. So anytime you have a color like blue, opposite of blue is orange. So when you mix blue and orange together, you're making mud. So if I want to get a purple that is not super clean and I want it to be a little bit more desaturated, I will go with my orangey red instead of my purpley red. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So that's what I'm going to take and just pop in here, right? And that, because purple tends to be a pretty dark kind of value color, like every color has a relative value. Like yellow is pretty bright, so it's pretty high value. Purple is pretty dark, so it's the dark value. So because I'm using that as the shadows of my cloud, they read as dark, right? We have a question?
Yeah, can you remind us what you are using to clean your brush?
Oh, I'm using Studio Self. Sorry. It is a odorless mineral spirit that I have in my little brush washer kind of jar. So it's just slightly off camera. So anytime I'm cleaning my brush, that's what I'm doing, is I'm just swirling it around in there. It has a little basket inside, so you can really knock off all the paint onto your, or in your jar, and then it kind of settles down to where you keep having a nice clean area to clean your brush off on, right? So I'm gonna kind of be pretty quick with this. Now, what I'm looking at is any areas where I see a little bit of purple, right? So if I see purple, I'm just gonna lay it down. I'm not gonna second guess it, right? I'm gonna say maybe a little bit over here, and this value might be wrong. It might be a lighter shade of purple. That's okay, because all I'm trying to do is get that information down. I can adjust it. If I look at what I have here and what I have here and I go, that's wrong. It's purple, but it needs to be lighter. Well, now I know where the purple is, but I just need to make it a little bit lighter. So I'll add a little bit of white, make it a little bit of a lighter value, and then start popping in lighter purple, right? So now I'm getting some variations in my cloud that is just color. I have my bright yellows for the sunshine, and we're just gonna kind of pop that in. Now, purple is not the only color I see. I can also see some, it almost appears like green, which is really bizarre. Now, I can make it green. I also have my sap green down here. Since I have it on my palette, I'm just gonna grab it. A little bit of green goes a long way. Now I'm going to keep mixing that into my blue, and this is why I don't mix a big puddle, because I start taking it and I kind of branch it off into different variations of color, which is really fun. But now this is going to work really well with that purple because it's the same blue that I have in here, but it's gonna kind of sort of make sense. Now, again, I'm mixing a green into my cloud, which seems weird, but once you lay it down, it doesn't seem all that bizarre because it still reads really dark, right? It's just a variation in color. Now, again, this is something that is really difficult to hone in on. I am very, very well versed in seeing weird colors in things. And I also think that it gets a little bit more blue right here. So again, practice makes perfect. This is not an easy process to do, especially with clouds and especially with white objects. They're the hardest thing. So give yourself a little bit of grace if you're struggling with this. Now, if I want to desaturate that sort of green, I'm going to go opposite on the color wheel again and go red. So again, this like crazy funky red, which is how I made my purple. So again, color harmony. And as I'm laying these down, whether you're working in acrylics or oils, especially oils, try not to over blend. I am not blending. I'm just popping the color down and moving on, right? So that is one thing that is really helpful. Again, I just laid that down, but like, does your brain go, what's wrong with that? That's a blob of weird green on a sort of cloud. No, your brain just fills in that information. So you don't start seeing the little chunks of color, you just see the whole image together. Now I think there's some variation here in lightness as well. I'm gonna get a little bit lighter, start getting some of these other really fun tones. And I made almost like a mint that is very desaturated. Hopefully you guys can see that. It's hard to see on this. It's getting glare. If we didn't have the lights on though, you guys wouldn't see what I'm doing. So this is just giving me some fun variations. Just a little variety. Now, here's the other thing with clouds. It is all relative. So if I put down this same color up here, next to that blue, it is very close in value. So it's really hard to see the difference between that edge of that part of the cloud and my blue sky. I can see it because, you know, you can see the difference in color. So I understand it's there, but when it comes to down here, if I put that same color down there, there's a huge difference in value from one to the other. So you need to kind of adjust your values of your colors sometimes like that. And notice I've not touched my black. Now, black is a very valid color on a palette. It is wonderful, but it is and can be a crutch for beginners. So if you can refrain from touching your black paint, that is ideal. So instead of going for black to darken my colors or make more, I'll go for my darker value of colors. Remember I said everything has an intrinsic value to color. So yellow is like brighter, purples and blues are darker. So is my green. So as I mix those in, I can get a really dark value that reads almost black if I wanted to. That's a really, really dark purple, but on my palette right now, it reads black, which is kind of cool. So if I'm trying to darken something, I'll go that way instead of going, making some mud here, instead of going towards black, which is another way of really pushing your colors in your paintings. Now that is a really funky muddy green that I just made, but I really like it for this cloud. It seems to work really well. Why not? Now I do see some other areas up here that look purple, but as they're transitioning into like this lighter area, they almost appear pink to me. So I'm gonna add pink. You have a question?
Yeah, Nola was wondering how often you do an underpainting in acrylic when you're working in oils.
Usually not ever. So it's one of those things where when it comes to underpaintings in acrylic, that is an absolutely wonderful thing. I did not do acrylic on this panel. This is oil. This underpainting that I have right here, that is an oil painting that I did weeks ago. So it's just touch dry, but it's one of those things that usually when it comes to acrylic paintings, if I'm painting in acrylic, I paint in acrylic. If I paint in oils, I'll paint in oils. I usually don't transition back and forth between them unless I'm doing something on purpose, which, you know, there's no wrong reason to do that. That's a wonderful thing to do, and it's really nice. But me personally, as an artist, I usually don't. But if you do, totally understand. Okay, so now I said that I saw a little bit of pink kind of in this area that transitions from my darks up to my light areas. So remember, I have two different reds on my palette. I have one that will lean more towards purple. And let me clean off my brush here so that I can get a clean mixture for you guys. Okay. And then I have one that will lean, if I can grab more paint, a little bit more towards orange, right? There are my two very, very different pinks. Now, this is a cloud, so everything's really bright. I'm going to add a lot more white. And I'm going to use this like purpley pink to go right next to my darker, cooler areas. This is me playing with color theory and temperature. So if all my shadows are nice and cool, all of my lights are nice and warm, this is a really lovely way of having that transition. So I'm just going from red to red, but I'm going from a cool red to a warm red. And that helps me transition into those areas without getting unintentional mud. Nobody likes unintentional mud. We like mud around here, don't get me wrong. I made a really muddy green, and that was wonderful. But unintentional mud is a little frustrating. All right, and again, you see how I'm just laying down little chunks of color, but I'm not actually mixing it in, right? So now I'm just wiping it off on my paper towel over here just to kind of knock off most of what's on my brush, and then I'm going to kind of lighten this quite a bit. So I want a really light value because it is cloud, and I want to get into that almost yellowy area. More of that. And then that should give me a little bit more variation on my light areas, because I also still have that other yellow I haven't touched. The one that leans a little bit more orange, that is still a valid option. So laying it down wherever I see it. I'm not worried about mixing anything in, but you can see that I'm moving my brush in various different ways. I am using a flat brush, so I have a brush stroke where if I go this way, it's a big flat area. If I turn it, I can get a little bit of a thinner area, almost like a round brush. Like if I turn it that way, it looks like a round brush. You can get a variation of different brush strokes when you do that, which is really helpful. Now, I'm going to start transitioning into that more orangey yellow. But again, I do need a lot lighter in value. And I'm only putting this where the lights are hitting my cloud, right? So even if I'm struggling with seeing the color, I understand warm color goes where the sun hits, right? So if you still follow these rules, even if you're not quite seeing it and you're struggling with that a little bit, it will still make it a understandable and interesting kind of painting, right? Something like that. And I made a cloud that is not just gray and white. And actually what's really funny is that it still looks like a really bright, fluffy cloud, right? There is no pure white. Nowhere in there. Not a single drop of pure white. Because that area where it looks really, really bright, that is that creamy yellow. So instead of using pure white, I have color and it has a visual interest to it. Now, the more I work on this, the more I might go from big shapes to like smaller shapes. And sometimes I might use a brush to kind of transition some things and get some softer transitions. And that's something that is entirely up to you as an artist and how you paint. I try not to mix everything in because this is just an exercise. So if you are struggling with getting like those accidental muddy areas, just don't mix. And if you want to go in with a clean brush and kind of fluff some areas, just so there are some variation of hard edges and soft edges, which will make it a little more understandable as a cloud. That's a good way of doing that. Now, we're going to quickly go over grass because I know we're getting close towards the end of our class. But grass is not just green. I know grass green, it just makes sense. And that sap green is a really lovely color, especially when it comes to fields and things like this, because, here, I'm gonna actually do this right here. Also move this off the table real fast. Here we go. So when you start breaking sap green down, it goes really yellow, right? It's a really lovely, lovely green. This is fantastic for landscapes. But this grass is a lot more brown. And I know that because I can see that in comparison. When you hold one next to the other, you go, that's not right. Now this is where that yellow ochre really does come in handy because these are what I consider my neutrals, right? So this is a yellow, but it is a brown yellow. So if I start mixing that in with my sap green, I can get this almost like desaturated brown yellow green kind of vibe, which is so naturalistic and found in the realm of, things that we see outside, because that sap green, or like a crazy, like almost like Christmassy Kelly green kind of color, those are really hard to work with. Green is like one of the hardest colors to work with. I could honestly have an entire show on how to use green because it is that difficult. Now, when it comes to laying down these colors, again, I'm using a kind of a flat brush. This is a bright, so I can get some variations. This is a flat, chunky area. This is almost like a round brush. The first layer that I do, I usually don't try and get those little variations of like grass kind of feels. Like little like brush strokes that make it look like grass, like what I did here. Because again, this is something I very much would do when I was younger and in my earlier kind of realm of painting. Instead of doing that, I am just going to lay down chunks of color. I'm going to squint at this image and I'm going to go, that's darker. but this is more green, this feels more red, right? It's weird, but that feels more red, right? So I'm gonna just put that in there, right? And when it comes to a horizon line, especially with grass and stuff like that, you can just chunk in the color and then deal with it later, because you could just wait for this whole thing to dry. And I know what I mixed together here. If you're having a hard time remembering what you've mixed together, make a swatch on your color diary and make notations. It's really helpful. I'm gonna have to add the color diary into the teacher's cart because I did not add that. That is a really good way of working on your practice. But if you get through the whole laying down chunks of color part, if I take my brush and load it up with paint, and I have that long skinny kind of edge, if I just take it and like little dabs will do ya. I'm just dabbing it. I'm not mixing anything. I'm just dabbing it, and it starts to look more like grass, right? Now there's a lot of different brushes that you can use. There's round brushes. If that works better for you, go for it. There are no wrong ways of using a brush, except for if you just decide to like brush your teeth with them. Don't do that. Like that's, I should say there are wrong ways of using a brush. There are no wrong ways of using a brush when it comes to painting. Don't eat your art supplies. But you know, that's the thing. It's like if you find something that works really well for you, use it. There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm just going to continue to dot in this like naturalistic, funky kind of brown green everywhere where I see. Because again, I'm seeing sort of like this shape here, but it almost like breaks off into a Y. So I'm going to kind of just, whatever I see, I put in, right? If I see it, it goes in. And this is where you can start breaking your shapes down into kind of just shapes. It's not grass, it's not a grassy field, it's just various shapes in various areas. Now, this up here feels like it got a lot darker, so this like really dark purple, I'm going to use that instead of the black. And actually when I mix it in, it almost goes like a really dark green, which is perfect. And I'm just going to just dab that in here and there where I see it. Now again, with oils, you usually want to work dark to light. Watercolors is light to dark. But you know, I already have this underpainting, so like if I miss some areas, that's okay. It's still going to read as a green field because it's already green. But if you're working on a raw canvas, maybe tone the whole thing in a really dark color and then start pulling out your highlights that way. That's a really fun way of doing that too. But I'm just trying to find variations of color. So I made that green that I had mixed here and a little bit of that phthalo green, which leans a little more green. And then I added in a little bit of this purpley mixture just to darken it. And it's just a really dark value right now. It feels more blue than any other color, but remember I'm also painting it next to all this green, so it's really going to feel more blue. Everything is relative. But I just have some dark areas here and there that need to be darkened, and I can go on top of them later on, right? So I'm going to start going a little bit lighter and just again getting some variations going on here. And I could paint this scene over and over and over again and get no two paintings looking alike, just because I see different colors every time I look there. There are so many different colors in this grass. Now, there are also a lot of like reds in this grass. So if I take that red, the permanent red light that leans more orange, and mix it in with my green, I'm getting a red, a lot more red than green. I'm getting a red that is pretty desaturated. And actually, let me clean off my brush here because it's getting pretty loaded with all kinds of different colors that I don't need. So if I do that, I can get some variations. And so if I start putting that in, you can see that red is there, but it's a very desaturated red, right? And it just gives you a different visual interest. And this right now has a really dark value, but if I want to lighten it up, maybe I'll add a little bit more orange, or not orange, the permanent yellow deep, the one that leans more orange. And that, because it has a higher value, will pull it into a lighter realm and make it feel a little bit more orangey, which is kind of cool. This is where that burnt sienna is also very useful, but again, I'm trying to just work not with my neutrals, but with these, because if I stick mostly with these, it will tell me more color information than if I just go with, oh, it's brown, right? So it's trying to use those variations of color. And just by adding in a little bit of that here and there, I'm getting a lot more visual interest in my grass area. And another thing to note with especially landscapes is that the closer something gets to you, the more detailed it should be. The further away it is, the less detailed it should be. So you know how I put in those little grassy bits here? That's pretty detailed. So that means everything up here needs to be really detailed, because you should be able to see things closer to you in more detail than that. So if I don't want to make this super detailed, don't make that super detailed. So keep that in mind, because your brain's going to go, why is this fuzzy when this is in focus? I should be able to understand what's happening here. Granted, there are some times where you can actually get away with that, but that is a more advanced class. We can talk about that in another class. Right, so this is where I might start playing with the grass shape. Now, every brush stroke that I'm putting into my grass is going with the same direction of the grass that is here. Even if I'm doing just a chunk of color, I'm not going this way, because that's not the way the grass goes. So it's allowing me to kind of just subtly hint at grass without actually having to paint every blade of grass, which is lovely because I don't have the patience for that. Now, since I have the blue here, I might as well mix that in because I have that like orangey yellow. It's going to go a little bit green, but it's also still very brown. And it also gives me just a different variation, right? And then the more and more I paint on this, the more variations I will get with all the different areas on my painting. And it will get closer and closer to this. So you can see, if I hold it up here, those are all just little brush strokes. And again, I got very detailed up here. I just indicated a couple little things happening, which means I need to get way more detailed here, which means this painting's not done. So if I get this to that stage, let me actually just swap them out real fast. Haha, it's like magic, movie magic, right? I did it. So if I get to this stage, this is where the point where I sometimes will just leave my painting and I will let it dry, because there is a lot of paint on this canvas panel, and sometimes when it gets to like, if you want to start adding in more details down here, it's already covered in paint, and this is very specific to oil painting, mind you. If you're working in acrylic, you can just let it dry and come back in an hour, but like with oil painting, this is where this now becomes my underpainting, and I will start working from the foreground backwards almost, and start popping in those details and letting it kind of fade off. That way I can start having those areas where you can see the blades of grass kind of coming in. And that's where I might start using my round brush and getting some of those variations where it can get a little bit more yellow with like blades of grass, something like that, right? So if I start popping in different details like that, that'll start giving me more details, and this becomes my background for this area. So it still has that color harmony. I'm still using the same colors. I'm just now adding in detail where I can use this to my advantage. Hopefully that makes sense. So that is essentially how to take your painting from a lower skill level, which, you know, no shame if you're in that arena. We all had to start somewhere. I started with terrible, terrible stick figure drawings when I was a kid, you know. All of the skill set that you see me doing on this show, it's all learned. It's all practice. I've been practicing for 20 years. more than 20 years. It's been a lot. We don't need to talk about that though. So just keep that in mind, that the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it. And if you are struggling and frustrated, take a step back. It's okay if you're having a hard time getting there. And again, you can always also leave any kind of comments or questions in our chats. And another really great way of reaching out is if you go to our Jerry's Life Facebook group. If you go over there, post your images of your paintings. You can actually ask for feedback, and it's like a group of 7,000 people. So not only are you going to get feedback from me, there are other people in the group that are professional artists. There are people who are, you know, hobbyists. There are people all the way in between, every walks of life, which is really, really cool. And you can get some feedback that way and get some pointers and tips and continue your practice that way. So the best thing I can just say is just keep practicing. You will get there eventually. But this is the kind of a few tips and tricks on how to kind of push your ability of, you know, color, seeing things in a less kind of simplistic way, and kind of looking at those objects in a little bit more detail, and just practice, practice, practice. So I hope that all made sense. If you have any questions, definitely put them in the comments below. And any last minute questions that we might have missed, I think we're probably good for right now. But if you do watch this in the future and you have them, just pop them in the chats. We always go back and check. So I hope you guys enjoyed the class and enjoyed the show. And of course, make sure you do tune in next week. We have Michaela coming back, and she's actually going to be talking about something that is so many questions. We get so many questions about these, and it is the cold wax mediums, and I'm so excited for this show. So all different brands of cold wax, and Michaela is going to be going in depth with what those are, the parameters of what they can do, and it's going to be a really wonderful class. So I hope you guys get to see it. So I will catch you guys next time. That was Jerry's Live. I'll see ya.